Let me give you the dictionary definitions of three political terms: socialism, fascism, and statism. Socialism, a theory or system of social organization which advocates the vesting of the ownership and control of the means of production, capital, land, etc., in the community as a whole. Fascism, a governmental system with strong centralized power, permitting no opposition or criticism, controlling all affairs of the nation, industrial, commercial, etc. Statism, the principle or policy of concentrating extensive economic, political, and related controls in the state at the cost of individual liberty. It is obvious that statism is the wider generic term, of which the other two are specific variants. It is also obvious that statism is the dominant political trend of our day. But which of those two variants represents the specific direction of that trend? Observe that both socialism and fascism involve the issue of property rights. The right to property is the right of use and disposal. Observe the difference in those two theories. Socialism negates private property rights altogether and advocates the vesting of ownership and control in the community as a whole, i.e. in the state. Fascism leaves ownership in the hands of private individuals, but transfers control of the property to the government. Ownership without control is a contradiction in terms. It means property without the right to use it or to dispose of it. It means that the citizens retain the responsibility of holding property without any of its advantages, while the government acquires all the advantages without any of the responsibility. In this respect, socialism is the more honest of the two theories. I say more honest, not better, because in practice there is no difference between them. Both come from the same collectivist statist principle. Both negate individual rights and subordinate the individual to the collective. Both deliver the livelihood and the lives of the citizens into the power of an omnipotent government. And the differences between them are only a matter of time, degree, and superficial detail, such as the choice of slogans by which the rulers delude their enslaved subjects. Which of these two variants of statism are we moving toward, socialism or fascism? To answer this question, one must first ask, which is the dominant ideological trend of today's culture? The disgraceful and terrifying answer is, there is no ideological trend today. There is no ideology. There are no political principles, theories, ideals, or philosophy. There is no direction, no goal, no compass, no vision of the future, no intellectual element of leadership. Are there any emotional elements dominating today's culture? Yes, one: fear. A mixed economy is a mixture of freedom and controls, with no principles, rules, or theories to define either. Since the introduction of controls necessitates and leads to further controls, it is an unstable, explosive mixture, which ultimately has to repeal the controls or collapse into dictatorship. A mixed economy has no principles to define its policies, its goals, its laws, no principles to limit the power of its government. The only principle of a mixed economy, which necessarily has to remain unnamed and unacknowledged, is that no one's interests are safe. Everyone's interests are on a public auction block, and anything goes for anyone who can get away with it. Such a system, or more precisely anti-system, breaks up a country into an ever-growing number of enemy camps, into economic groups fighting one another for self-preservation in an indeterminate mixture of defense and offense, as the nature of such a jungle demands. While politically a mixed economy preserves the semblance of an organized society with a semblance of law and order, economically it is the equivalent of the chaos that had ruled China for centuries, a chaos of robber gangs looting and draining the productive elements of the country. A mixed economy is ruled by pressure groups. It is an amoral, institutionalized civil war of special interests and lobbies, all fighting to seize a momentary control of the legislative machinery, to extort some special privilege at one another's expense by an act of government, i.e. by force. In the absence of individual rights, in the absence of any moral or legal principles, a mixed economy's only hope to preserve its precarious semblance of order, to restrain the savage, desperately rapacious groups it itself has created, and to prevent the legalized plunder from running over into plain unlegalized looting of all by all, is compromise. Compromise on everything and in every realm, material, spiritual, intellectual, so that no group would step over the line by demanding too much and topple the whole rotted structure. If the game is to continue, nothing can be permitted to remain firm, solid, absolute, untouchable. Everything and everyone has to be fluid, flexible, indeterminate, approximate. By what standard are anyone's actions to be guided? By the expediency of any immediate moment. The only danger to a mixed economy is any not-to-be-compromised value, virtue, or idea. The only threat is any uncompromising person, group, or movement. The only enemy is integrity. It is unnecessary to point out who will be the steady winners and who the constant losers in a game of that kind. It is also clear what sort of unity, of consensus, that game requires. The unity of a tacit agreement that anything goes, anything is for sale or for negotiation, and the rest is up for the free-for-all of pressuring, lobbying, manipulating, favor-swapping, public relationing, give-and-taking, double-crossing, begging, bribing, betraying, and chance, the blind chance, of a war in which the prize is the privilege of using legal armed force against legally disarmed victims. Observe that this type of prize establishes one basic interest held in common by all the players, the desire to have a strong government. A government of unlimited power, strong enough to let the winners and would-be winners get away with whatever they're seeking. A government uncommitted to any policy, unrestrained by any ideology, a government that hoards an ever-growing power, power for power's sake, which means for the sake and use of any major gang who might seize it momentarily to ram their particular piece of legislation down the country's throat. Observe, therefore, that the doctrine of compromise and moderation applies to everything except one issue, any suggestion to limit the power of the government. Observe the torrents of vilification, abuse, and hysterical hatred unleashed against any advocate of freedom, i.e. of capitalism. In the 1930s, the liberals had a program of broad social reforms and a crusading spirit. They advocated a planned society. They talked in terms of abstract principles. They propounded theories of a predominantly socialistic nature.
Of course, we believe these things. We believe in social security. We believe in work for the unemployed. We believe in saving homes.
Most of them were touchy about the accusation that they were enlarging the government's power. Most of them were assuring their opponents that government power was only a temporary means to an end, a noble end, the liberation of the individual from his bondage to material needs. Today, nobody talks of a planned society in the liberal camp. Long-range programs, theories, principles, abstractions, and noble ends are not fashionable any longer. Modern liberals deride any political concern with such large-scale matters as an entire society or an economy as a whole. They concern themselves with single, concrete-bound, range-of-the-moment projects and demands, without regard to cost, context, or consequences. Pragmatic, not idealistic, is their favorite adjective when they are called upon to justify their stance, as they call it, not stand. They are militantly opposed to political philosophy. They denounce political concepts as tags, labels, myths, illusions, and resist any attempt to label, i.e. to identify, their own views. They are belligerently anti-theoretical, and, with a faded mantle of intellectuality still clinging to their shoulders, they are anti-intellectual. The only remnant of their former idealism is a tired, cynical, ritualistic quoting of shop-worn humanitarian slogans when the occasion demands it. Cynicism, uncertainty, and fear are the insignia of the culture which they are still dominating by default, and the only thing that has not rusted in their ideological equipment, but has grown savagely brighter and clearer through the years, is their lust for power, for an autocratic, statist, totalitarian government power. That every problem can be solved by the magic power of brute force. Now I shall ask you to consider the question I raised at the beginning of this discussion. Which of these two variants of statism are we moving toward? Socialism or fascism? There is a whole series of American legislative acts that increase either government regulation of private business or government responsibility for individual welfare. It is to such legislation that warning cries of socialism refer. It is true that the welfare statists are not socialists, that they never advocated or intended the socialization of private property, that they want to preserve private property, with government control of its use and disposal. But that is the fundamental characteristic of fascism.